The Adventure of the Golden Pince-Nez. When I look back through my 3 volumes of notes recording our work in the year 1894, I must confess that it is no easy matter to choose from so rich a collection those cases which are at once sufficiently curious and sufficiently illustrative of the peculiar gifts which have made my friend Holmes so remarkable. As I run my eye over the entries, I come upon the revolting story of the Red Leech and the terrible death of Crosby the banker. There is the Addleton tragedy and the strange matter of the ancient British barrows. There is, too, the celebrated Smith-Mortimer inheritance case and the pursuit and arrest of Harriet. The affair of the Boulevard assassin, so brilliantly handled that the President of the French Republic wrote to Sherlock Holmes in his own hand, and my friend received the Legion of Honor, was another notable incident of that year. Each of these, in its own way, would have well-deserved publication. Yet I am of the opinion that none of them gathered within itself so many strange and original features as the occurrence at Yoxley Old Place. It concerned, first, the miserable death of young Willoughby Smith, and secondly, those later developments which cast a singular light upon the motive of the crime and the hand that committed it. It was a stormy and bitter night toward the end of November. Holmes and I were both occupied in our own fashion. He had taken up his powerful lens and was endeavoring to decipher the faded writing upon an ancient parchment, while I had buried myself in a surgical treatise. Outside, the wind howled and the rain lashed fiercely against our windows. Even though we were surrounded on every side, 16 kilometers at least, by the endless handiwork of man, it was a strange sensation to feel the raw force of nature pressing in upon us. To remember that, in the face of such elemental fury, mighty London itself was no more than a frail burrow in an open field. Now and then, along the muddy roads and shining pavements, a distant lamp flared faintly and vanished. A rider came splashing down Oxford Street toward our end of the town. Holmes laid aside his lens and rolled up the parchment. "Thank heaven we are not obliged to go out on such a night. Watson," said he, "that will do for today. One's eyes grow weary." The most thrilling thing I have learned so far is that this is a monastic record from the latter half of the 15th century. Ha! 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 What is this now? Through the roar of the wind we could hear the beat of hoofs and the long, grating cry of a wheel against the curb. The vehicle I had glimpsed from the window had drawn up at our door. "What can he possibly want?" I exclaimed, as the man climbed down from the carriage. "To want? Of course he wants us, my dear fellow," said Holmes. "We shall require coats, scarves, stout boots, and every invention known to mankind for resisting foul weather. Wait, look! The carriage is moving off again. There is still hope. If he wished us to accompany him, he would not have dismissed it. Run and open the door, Watson, for all respectable folk are long since in bed." When the corridor lamp fell upon the face of our midnight visitor, I had no difficulty in recognizing him. It was Stanley Hopkins, the young inspector of promise, whose career Holmes had aided upon more than one occasion, and in whose progress he took a friendly interest. "Is he in?" Hopkins asked eagerly. "Come up," called Holmes from above. "I trust you have not formed plans for us on such a night." The detective entered, his raincoat gleaming with wet under the lamplight. Holmes stirred the fire, while I took our guest's dripping coat. "My dear Hopkins, come nearer and warm yourself," said Holmes. "Take a cigar." "The doctor has a special concoction of hot water and lemon. Excellent medicine on nights like these. Since you have braved this tempest to visit us at such an hour, something of importance must surely be afoot." "You are right, Mr. Holmes. I assure you I have been hard at work since early afternoon. Have you read the reports in the evening papers about the Yoxley case?" "The newest thing I have read today is a parchment from the 15th century. It was barely a paragraph, and wrong from beginning to end. So you have lost nothing. I have not sat still for a moment. Yoxley is in Kent, 11 kilometers from Chatham, 5 from the railway. A telegram reached me at 3:15. I went at once, arrived at Yoxley Old Place about 5, and began my investigation. I returned by the last train to Charing Cross, and from there came straight here in a cab. Am I to conclude that you have found the case beyond you? To be frank, sir, I can make nothing of it at all. At first it looked childishly simple, but it has proved to be the most baffling matter I have ever encountered. There is no motive, Mr. Holmes. That is what troubles me. I cannot find a reason. There is a dead man, murdered, but who would wish to kill such a man, and why? I have not the faintest notion. Holmes lit his cigar and leaned back in his chair. Tell me the story. I have gathered facts enough, said Stanley Hopkins. All I need now is to understand what they mean. The matter runs thus. Yoxley Old Place is a country house which, some years ago, was purchased by an elderly man named Professor Coram. His health is poor, and he spends half his time in bed. When he is up, he either moves slowly about the house, leaning upon his stick, or is wheeled through the garden in a chair pushed by the gardener. He is well liked by 1 or 2 neighbors who call upon him, and is generally considered a man of learning. Since he settled there, 2 women have been in his service. One is an elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Marker, responsible for the order and cleanliness of the house. The other is a young maid, Susan Tarleton. Both have excellent reputations. Last year, as the professor had begun work upon a serious book, he felt the need of a secretary. He dismissed the first 2, but the third, young Willoughby Smith, a university graduate, proved exactly what he required. The young man's task was to take down the professor's words in the morning, and in the evening to consult the sources for the following day's work. In his years at Uppingham, or Cambridge, he was known as a decent fellow. I have examined his references. From the first he appears honest, clean living, quiet, industrious, with no vices. And yet this morning he was found dead in the professor's study, and the only possible explanation is murder. Outside, the wind still howled with unabated fury. As the young inspector unfolded his curious narrative, Holmes and I drew closer to the fire. Hopkins continued, "You could search all England and not find a household more shut off from the world, more self-contained. There are times when none of them pass beyond the garden gate for weeks together. The professor lives buried in his work and cares for nothing outside it. Young Smith knew nobody in the neighborhood, and his life differed little from his employer's. The 2 women have no errands which would take them away. The gardener, Mortimer, is a retired soldier, an old Crimean man, and his character is beyond reproach. He wheels the professor about the grounds. He does not live in the house itself, but in a small 3-room building at the far end of the garden. That is the whole population of Yoxley Old Place. The garden gate lies about 100 meters from the London Chatham Road. It has only a simple latch, and anyone could enter the grounds with ease. Now, I will give you Susan Tarleton's statement, for she is the only person who provides anything solid to grasp. The time was between 11 and 12 in the morning. Susan was upstairs, hanging a curtain in one of the front rooms. Professor Coram was still in bed. Indeed, in bad weather it was rare for him to rise before noon. Mrs. Marker was at the back of the house, engaged in her work. Willoughby Smith was in his own room, but Susan heard him pass along the corridor and go down into the study on the floor below. She did not see him, but she could distinguish his brisk, firm footsteps clearly enough. She did not hear the study door close, but about a minute later there came from below a dreadful scream, shrill and muffled, a sound so unnatural that she could not even say whether it came from a man or a woman. At that instant there was a heavy thud, as if some great weight had fallen. The whole old house seemed to tremble. Then silence. For a moment the girl stood frozen in terror, but she mastered herself and ran downstairs. The study door was shut. When she opened it, she saw young Willoughby Smith stretched at full length upon the floor. At first she did not realize he was wounded, but when she tried to lift him, she saw blood flowing from beneath his neck. There was a small but terribly deep wound, and the poor fellow's great artery had been pierced. The instrument which had done it lay upon the carpet beside his head. It was a strong, ivory-handled paper knife of the kind one finds upon old-fashioned writing desks, part of the professor's own desk set. At first Susan believed Smith was already dead, but when she dashed water from a jug over his forehead, the young man opened his eyes for an instant and murmured, "Professor." And then, it was the woman. The maid is absolutely certain those were the exact words. He tried to say something more, raising his right hand slightly into the air, but he could endure no longer and died. By that time, Mrs. Marker had reached the room, though she did not hear the dying words. Leaving Susan with the body, she ran at once to the professor's bedroom. He was sitting up in bed, greatly alarmed. Mrs. Marker is positive that he was still in his nightclothes. Indeed, the truth is he cannot dress without Mortimer's assistance, and Mortimer had been told to come at 12, so he had not yet entered the house at all. The professor says he heard a scream from a distance, but knows nothing beyond it. He cannot explain the words "professor." It was the woman, and believes the dying man was raving senselessly. He can think of no enemy that Smith could have had, and can see no reason why anyone should wish him dead. His first act was to send Mortimer to fetch the police. Shortly afterwards, the local chief sent for me. Nothing had been touched until I arrived. The moment I came upon the scene, I gave strict orders that no one should walk along the paths leading to the house. It was a splendid opportunity to apply your theories, Mr. Holmes. Everything was intact. Everything except Sherlock Holmes, said my friend, with a thin, bitter smile. Well then, tell me what you did. First, Mr. Holmes, I want you to look at this rough plan. It will help you understand the position of the professor's study and several points connected with the case. He unfolded a sketch, which I have reproduced below, and laid it across Holmes's knees. I stood behind my friend, peering over his shoulder. It is a very crude drawing, of course. I have only marked what seemed important. You can see the rest for yourself. Now, then, assuming the murderer entered from outside, how did he come in? There could be little doubt that he came by the garden path and through the back door, which opens directly into the study. Any other way would have been far more difficult, and he must have escaped by the same route, for one of the other exits was blocked by Susan rushing downstairs, and the other leads straight up to the professor's room. For that reason, I concentrated my attention upon the garden path. Since there had been rain recently and the ground was soaked, there ought certainly to have been footprints. My examination convinced me that we were dealing with a careful and experienced criminal. There were no footprints on the garden path itself. It was clear that someone had walked along the grass at the side, and that could only have been done in order to avoid leaving a trace. Though I could not obtain a clear print, the crushed blades were unmistakable. Someone had passed that way. It could only have been the murderer, for no one, not even the gardener, had gone into the garden that day, and the rain did not begin until nightfall. "One moment," said Holmes. "Where does the garden path lead?" "To the main road." "How long is it?" "About 900 meters. And at the gate, did you find any sign there?" "Unfortunately, that portion is paved with stone." "And on the road itself?" "No, the road had become a sea of mud." "Damn," said Holmes. "And did the marks in the grass show whether the person was approaching the house or leaving it?" "That is impossible to say. There is no distinct track." "Was the foot large or small?" That, too, could not be determined. Holmes looked distinctly dissatisfied, and since then, he cried impatiently, "We have had a gale and heavy rain." To read those traces now would be harder than to read your parchment. Still, there is nothing for it. After you discovered you understood nothing at all, Hopkins, what did you do next? I believe I did understand a great deal, Mr. Holmes. I understood that someone had entered the house from outside with extreme caution. Then I examined the corridor. It was covered with a coconut fiber runner, and there were no marks upon the flooring. So I turned my attention to the study. The room contained little of importance except a large writing desk. The desk has 2 rows of drawers, and between them a central compartment with a flap. The drawers were open, but the central compartment was locked. It appears the drawers were usually left open, and there was nothing valuable inside them. The flap compartment contained some important papers, but there was no sign they had been disturbed, and the professor was certain that nothing was missing. It was clear that this was no robbery. "Now let me speak of the body," said Hopkins. As you can see from the plan, it lay immediately to the left of the desk. The blade had entered the right side of the neck, traveling from back to front, which makes it almost impossible that the wound was self-inflicted. "Unless he fell upon it," remarked Holmes. "Quite so. That occurred to me as well. But since we found the knife nearly a meter from the deceased, it seems out of the question. And then there is dying words, of course. Finally, there is this most important piece of evidence, the thing he had clenched in his right hand." Stanley Hopkins drew a small parcel from his pocket. When he unfolded the paper, a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles lay within. From both broken temples dangled scraps of silk cord. "Willoughby Smith's eyesight was excellent," said Stanley. "There is no doubt in my mind that he tore these from his murderer's face." Sherlock Holmes took the glasses and examined them with the closest attention and interest. He slipped them on and attempted to read, then walked to the window and stared out into the night. He held them up to the lamp, turning them slowly. At last he gave a little chuckle, returned to his desk, scribbled a few lines upon a slip of paper, and handed it to Hopkins. "That is all I can do for you," said he. "It may prove useful." The astonished inspector read aloud what Holmes had written. "Wanted, a woman dressed as a lady. Extremely thick nose piece. Eyes set very close together. Forehead lined. Back slightly hunched. Bearing aristocratic. Has probably visited an optician at least twice within the last few months. Her spectacles are unusually strong, and since opticians are not so numerous, she should not be difficult to trace." Holmes smiled at Hopkins's bewilderment. "In truth, I felt much the same myself." "These are the simplest of deductions," said Holmes. "There is no object more suggestive than a person's spectacles, particularly such spectacles as these. Their elegance alone declares them to be a woman's, and your victim's last words lend further weight. As for her being well-dressed and of distinguished appearance, you can see for yourself that the frame is of 24-karat gold. Could the owner of such an article be slovenly in dress or manner? Observe the breadth of the bridge. It sits far too widely upon your own nose. Therefore, the lower part of the woman's nose must be exceedingly narrow. Such noses are often short and coarse, though I admit there are exceptions, and I do not insist upon that point. My own face is narrow, yet my eyes do not fall upon the center of the lenses, nor even near it. Hence the woman's eyes must lie very close to her nose. And if you look closely, Watson, you will see that the lenses are as thick as the bottom of a bottle. A woman who has lived her whole life with vision so defective will bear it in her features, her forehead, her eyelids, her shoulders, exactly as I have described. "I follow your reasoning," said I, "but I confess I cannot see how you arrive at the conclusion that she has been to an optician twice." Holmes lifted the spectacles again and explained, At the ends of the temples, you will notice pieces of cork, fitted to prevent the metal from chafing the skin. One of them is faded and worn, the other is new. Therefore, one must have been lost and replaced. I should judge the older cork to be no more than a month or two old. And since both corks are precisely alike, the replacement must have been done by the same optician. Hence, she visited him twice. Extraordinary, cried Hopkins, delighted. To think I had the spectacles in my possession and never understood any of this. Still, I had decided to begin visiting opticians in London. You must, of course. Now, have you anything else to tell me about the case? No, Mr. Holmes. At this point you know as much as I do, perhaps more. We made inquiries to see whether any stranger had been noticed on the country roads or at the station, but nothing came of it. The one thing that haunts me is the absence of motive. No one can suggest even the smallest reason for the murder. I can offer none either, said Holmes. But I take it you wish us to come down with you tomorrow? It may be asking too much, but there is a train from Charing Cross to Chatham at 6 in the morning. We should reach Yoxley Old Place by 8 or 9. Then we leave tomorrow morning. There are certain features of the case which interest me. I shall be glad to look into it. It is already 1 o'clock. A little sleep before we start would not come amiss. You may find a sofa by the fire comfortable enough, and I can make you coffee on the spirit stove before we leave. When we set out the next morning, the storm had passed, but a biting cold remained. As we traveled, watching the sun rise over the gloomy marshes and the silent, dark-moving stretches of the Thames, I found myself thinking of the early days of our career, of that long pursuit of the Andaman Islander. After a weary journey, we descended at a small station some kilometers from Chatham. While our horse was being harnessed to the trap, we ate a hurried breakfast at a little inn. By the time we reached Yoxley Old Place, we were all ready to set to work at once. A constable met us at the gate. Any news, Wilson? No, sir, nothing at all. No one has seen a stranger. No, sir. No one at the station saw any stranger arrive or depart yesterday. You searched the lodging houses and inns? Yes, sir. No suspicious person. Chatham is not far from here. She might have walked there and then taken the train without attracting attention, or stayed the night. This is the garden path, Mr. Holmes. I would stake my reputation that there were no footprints on it yesterday. On which side of the path were the marks in the grass? Asked Holmes. On this side, sir, between the path and the flower beds. I can't see them now, but yesterday they were clear enough. Yes, someone certainly passed this way, said Holmes, bending over the grass. She must have stepped very carefully, mustn't she? If she walked here on the path, she would have left prints. If she went through the flower beds, the traces would have been even clearer. Yes, sir. She must have been cool-headed. Holmes's face had taken on a thoughtful, intent expression. You believe she came this way after committing the murder? Yes, sir. She had no other choice. Along this strip of grass beside the path. Exactly so, Mr. Holmes. H.M., a great achievement. An excellent achievement indeed, said Holmes dryly. Yes, I think we have done with the garden path. Let us examine the rest. I suppose the gate is always left unfastened. In that case, our visitor could stroll in without the slightest difficulty. When she entered, she cannot have intended murder, or she would have brought a weapon rather than seize the paper knife from the desk. She walked along this corridor, yet left no mark upon the coconut fiber runner. Then she entered this study. How long she remained here, we cannot say. At most a few minutes, sir. I forgot to mention, Mrs. Marker cleaned the room shortly before the incident. She said about 15 minutes earlier. Then our time frame is very narrow. The woman enters. What does she do? She goes to the writing desk. But why? Not for something in the drawers. If the drawers held anything valuable, they would have been locked. She must have been after something in the central compartment. Hallo, What is this scratch upon the surface? Strike a match, Watson. Why did you not mention this, Hopkins? The mark lay to the right of the keyhole in the brass plate. It was some 10 centimeters in length and had scraped away the varnish, leaving the metal raw and bright beneath. I noticed it, but I assumed scratches around a keyhole were natural, Mr. Holmes. This is new, very new. See how the brass shines where it has been scored. If the scratch were old, it would have dulled to the same color as the rest. Examine it with my lens, if you wish. The varnish has been pushed aside on both edges, like soil thrown up on either side of a plow. Is Mrs. Marker here? A sorrowful-looking elderly woman entered. Did you dust this desk yesterday? Yes, sir. Did you notice this scratch? No, sir, I did not. I'm sure you did not. For if you had dusted it, these flakes of varnish would not still be here. Who keeps the key to this compartment? The professor. It hangs from his watch chain. Is it an ordinary key? No, sir. It is a Chubb key. Thank you, Mrs. Marker. That will do. He turned back to us, his eyes bright. Yes, we have made some progress. The woman enters the room and goes straight to the desk. As she opens the compartment, or attempts to, young Willoughby Smith comes in. She tries to snatch the key from the lock in haste and scratches the brass. The young man catches her. She strikes out with the first object at hand, the paper knife, and the blow proves fatal. He falls. She escapes, whether she obtained the object she sought or not. Is Susan here? Susan, after you heard the scream, could anyone have left by this door? No, sir. Impossible. If anyone had been in the corridor, I would have seen them before I reached the stairs. And the door never opened. If it had, I would have heard it. Then she did not escape that way. In that case, there can be no doubt she returned by the way she came. As I understand it, the other corridor leads only to the professor's room. There is no other exit in that direction. No, sir. Then let us go and meet the professor. Look at this, Hopkins. This is important. Very important indeed. The corridor leading to the professor's room is also covered with coconut fiber matting. Yes, but what of it? Can you not see the bearing it has upon the case? No matter. I shall not insist. I am no doubt mistaken, but may still prove suggestive. Come, introduce us. We crossed the corridor, which was as long as the one leading to the garden, and reached the staircase. At the top was a door. Our guide knocked, and then we entered Professor Corum's bedroom. It was a large room crammed to the ceiling with books. The shelves could not contain them all. Volumes were piled in corners and stacked beside trunks and boxes. The owner of the house sat propped in bed at the center. Rarely have I seen a stranger human being. He turned upon us a thin, eagle-like face. From beneath thick, bristling eyebrows, his eyes shone sharp and piercing from deep hollows. His hair and beard were snow-white, save for the yellow stains around his mouth. In the midst of that pallid face, a cigarette glowed like a small ember. The stench of stale smoke hung heavily in the room. When he extended his hand to Holmes, I noticed that even his fingers were yellowed with nicotine. In carefully chosen words, spoken with a faint foreign accent, he asked, "Do you smoke? Will you take one? You, sir? It is an excellent cigarette, made specially for me by Ionides in Alexandria. He sends them in packets of 1,000, but I regret to say he must send a new packet every 15 days. Yes, it is bad, very bad. But an old man has so few luxuries. I have only my tobacco and my work." Holmes had already lit one and was glancing about the room. "Tobacco and work?" the old man groaned. "Now I have only tobacco. Alas, what a loss, what a terrible loss. Who could have imagined such a calamity? We have lost a most valuable young man. I assure you, with a few more months of training, he would have become an excellent assistant. What do you think of this matter, Mr. Holmes? I have not yet formed an opinion. If you can bring light to this mystery which baffles us completely, we shall be deeply grateful. For a sick and elderly bookworm such as myself, it is a paralyzing blow. I feel as though I have lost the power to think. But you are a man of action. These matters are your trade. For you, it is routine. In any crisis, you preserve your composure. I count myself fortunate that someone like you is here. While the professor spoke, Holmes paced slowly up and down the room. I noticed that he was smoking with unusual speed. It seemed that he enjoyed the fresh Alexandrian tobacco almost as much as our host did. "Yes, sir," continued the old man. "It is a grievous blow. And there is my masterpiece." He nodded toward a small table where papers lay stacked. An analysis of documents discovered in Coptic monasteries in Syria and Egypt, a work which will tear the divine faith out by the roots. Yet with my assistant gone forever and in my poor health, how can I hope to complete it? And look at this. You are even more of a smoker than I am, Mr. Holmes. Holmes smiled. "When it comes to tobacco, I am something of an authority," said he, taking a fourth cigarette from the box. He lit it from the stump of the previous one, which he had not yet extinguished. "I have no wish to exhaust you with questions, Professor Coram. I understand you were in bed at the time of the murder, and cannot possibly know much of it. I have only one question. When the poor fellow died, he said, 'Professor, it was the woman.' What do you suppose he meant?" The professor shook his head. "Susan is a peasant girl," said he. "You know how foolish such people are. I believe the poor fellow muttered nonsense as he died, and Susan shaped it in her own mind until it became that meaningless message." "I see. And how do you explain the tragedy?" "It was probably an accident. Probably," he lowered his voice slightly. "Between ourselves, I believe it was suicide. Young men may have hidden troubles. Perhaps there was some affair of the heart of which we knew nothing. That seems to me more likely than murder." "But the spectacles?" I asked. I'm only a scholar, a man of dreams. I cannot explain the practical side of life. Yet I know that love may express itself in strange ways." "Take another cigarette. It is pleasing to see someone enjoy them so much. A fan, gloves, spectacles. Who can say how precious such objects may be to one who intends to die? This gentleman says he saw footprints in the grass, but he may be mistaken. As for the knife, it may have been flung away when the poor fellow fell. Perhaps I speak like a child, but it seems to me that Willoughby Smith met his end by his own hand." Holmes appeared struck by the professor's theory. He continued to pace, smoking cigarette after cigarette, his mind clearly working behind his unreadable expression. At last he stopped. "May I ask, Professor Coram," said he, "what is contained in the locked compartment of your writing desk?" "Nothing that would interest a thief. Family papers, letters from my poor wife, my university diplomas, honors which I have had the privilege of receiving. The key is here. You may examine it yourself if you wish." Holmes took the key and studied it for a moment before returning it. "No," said he, "I do not think it will help me. Instead, I should like to go out into the garden and think quietly. We may speak further of your suicide theory. Forgive us for troubling you. I promise we shall not disturb you again until after luncheon. At 2 o'clock we shall return and inform you of any developments, if there are any." I confess I found Holmes's distraction remarkable. For some time we wandered through the garden without speaking a word. At last I asked, "Have you any clue at all?" "It depends on the cigarettes I've been smoking," said he. "Perhaps I am making a grave mistake. The cigarettes will tell." "Holmes," I cried, "how can you possibly?" "Never mind. You will see with your own eyes soon enough. And if it fails, no great harm is done. We can still reach the truth by working through the opticians, but I always prefer the shortest road when it is open. Ah, Mrs. Marker is here. Let's have a 5-minute conversation with her. It may prove instructive." I may have mentioned before that when Holmes chose to be, he could be remarkably charming with women, and he won their confidence with effortless ease. In less than half the time he had promised, he had drawn the housekeeper into friendly talk, as though they had been companions for 40 years. "You are quite right, Mr. Holmes, exactly as you say. He smokes terribly, all day without stopping, and sometimes even at night. Once I went into his room in the morning, and it was thick with smoke. You would have thought London fog had settled indoors. Poor Mr. Smith smoked too, but nothing like the professor. His health. I cannot tell whether smoking was better for him or not." "Indeed," said Holmes, "but tobacco dulls the appetite." "I'm not certain of that, sir. I doubt the professor eats properly at all. You never know what to expect from him. I would wager he has had no breakfast this morning, and after so many cigarettes, he will hardly touch his luncheon." "There you are mistaken, sir," she replied. "He ate a very hearty breakfast this morning. I cannot remember ever seeing him eat so much. And he asked for a fine chop for lunch. To be honest, I was surprised myself because after seeing that poor young gentleman lying there in the study yesterday, I did not feel I could so much as look at food. But people are made in different ways. The professor's appetite hasn't suffered in the slightest." We wandered about the garden until midday. Stanley Hopkins had gone down to the village to follow up a rumor that the previous morning some children had seen a strange woman on the Chatham Road. As for my friend, there was little trace of his usual energy. I had never known him to approach a case with such reluctance. Even the news Hopkins brought back failed to stir him. Though the children had indeed described a spectacled woman who matched Holmes's portrait exactly. But Holmes's interest quickened when Susan, serving us at luncheon, remarked that Mr. Smith had gone out for a walk the previous morning and had returned only half an hour before the tragedy occurred. I could not see what relevance this could possibly have, yet I could tell that Holmes had placed it neatly into some larger framework in his mind. He rose abruptly and glanced at his watch. "Gentlemen," said he, "it is 2 o'clock. We must see the professor." The old man had just finished eating. His empty plate was proof enough that the housekeeper had not exaggerated his appetite. When he turned his white mane and glittering eyes toward us, he presented a singular spectacle indeed. The cigarette, which never left his lips, burned steadily between them. He was now dressed and seated in his wheeled chair by the fire. "Well, Mr. Holmes," said he, "have you solved the mystery?" He pushed toward Holmes the large tin cigarette box on the table beside him. At that exact moment, Holmes reached out, and the box slid from the edge and fell to the floor. We were forced to drop to our knees and spend several minutes collecting the cigarettes as they rolled into every inconvenient corner. When we finally rose, I saw Holmes's eyes shining, color blooming in his cheeks. These were the signs of battle I had seen only in moments of crisis. "Yes," said Holmes, "I have solved it." Hopkins and I stared at him in amazement. The professor's thin face trembled with something like contempt. "Have you? In the garden?" "No. Here." "Here? When?" "Now." "You must be jesting, Mr. Holmes, though I must tell you this matter is far too serious for jokes. I have tested every link in the chain, Professor Coram. Each has endured the strain. Though I do not yet know the exact nature of your part in this strange business, nor why you acted as you did, I shall probably hear a tale of it from your own lips within minutes. Until then, I will tell you what occurred, so that you may see what remains unexplained. Yesterday, a woman entered your study. Her purpose was to obtain a document from the locked compartment in your writing desk. She possessed the key to that compartment. I had the opportunity to examine your own key, and I observed that it lacked the faint discoloration which would be present if it had recently scraped against the polished brass surface. From this, I conclude that the woman was not your accomplice. She came here to rob you. A cloud of smoke rose from the professor's lips. "Very interesting," said he. "Very instructive. Have you anything else to tell us? Since you have traced the woman, I assume you know her fate as well." "I will attempt to explain it. The woman was caught by your secretary, and in her struggle to escape, she stabbed the young man. I regard it as a dreadful accident. I do not believe she intended such a thing. Had she come with murder in mind, she would not have come unarmed. Horrified by what she had done, she fled at once. But in the struggle, she lost her spectacles, and being violently short-sighted, she was helpless without them. Believing she was running back the way she had come, she darted into one of the corridors, because both corridors were covered with coconut fiber matting, and to her touch and memory they would have felt identical. By the time she realized she had taken the wrong corridor, and that her escape was cut off, it was too late. What was she to do? She could not turn back, nor could she remain where she was. She had to go forward, and so she did. She climbed the stairs, opened the door before her, and found herself in your room. The old man stared at Holmes with his mouth slightly open. Fear and astonishment battled across his expressive face. He rallied, shrugged, and gave a hollow laugh. "So far, so good," said he. "But your magnificent theory has one small defect. I did not leave my room all day yesterday. I know that, Professor Coram." "Then you mean to tell me a woman entered my room while I lay in bed, without my noticing?" "I said nothing of the sort. You noticed. You spoke with her. You recognized her, and you helped her to escape." The professor burst into laughter again. He had risen to his feet, his eyes blazing. "You are mad," he shouted. "This is nonsense. I helped her escape, did I? Then where is she now?" "There," said Holmes, pointing toward a tall bookcase in the corner. The old man threw his arms outward in helpless protest. His face twisted with the anguish of despair. He sank back into his chair. At that instant, the bookcase Holmes had indicated swung outward on its hinges like a door, and a woman stepped into the room. "You are right," she cried in a strange accent. "You are right. Here I am." She looked as though she had gathered every speck of grime, rust, and cobweb from her hiding place. Dirt streaked her face in dark lines. She was not a beautiful woman, and her features matched Holmes's deductions exactly, save for one detail: a long, stubborn jaw which his description had not included. Whether from poor eyesight or from the shock of stepping suddenly from darkness into light, she seemed dazed. She blinked rapidly, trying to understand who we were and where she stood. And yet, in spite of everything, there was something unmistakably noble in her bearing, in the proud lift of her head and the defiant set of her chin. One could not help but feel a reluctant admiration for her. Stanley Hopkins seized her arm and told her she was under arrest. When she gently moved him aside, there was such dignity in the motion that it was impossible not to feel it. The old man leaned back in his chair, staring at her with twitching features. He was clearly lost in thought. "Yes, sir, I am under arrest," said the woman. "From where I was hidden, I heard every word you spoke, and I know that you have discovered the truth. I admit everything. I killed that young man. But as you said, it was an accident. In that moment, I seized whatever lay upon the desk, and I did not even realize there was a knife in my hand. I meant only to strike him away and escape. What I say is the truth." "I have no doubt of it, madam," said Holmes. "But I fear your situation is a desperate one." Her complexion was deathly pale. The filth and rust upon her made the clean portions of her skin appear even whiter, ghastly, unnatural. She sat down on the edge of the bed and continued. "I have little time left," she said, "but I want you to know the whole truth. I am this man's wife. He is not English, he is Russian, but I will not speak his name." For the first time, the old man spoke. "God protect you, Anna," he cried. "God protect you." The woman looked at him with disgust. Why do you cling so desperately to your miserable life? Sergius, she demanded. It has brought you no benefit, only ruin, as it has ruined so many others. Yet until God chooses the day, I do not intend to cut that thread with my own hands. From the moment I stepped across the threshold of this cursed house, I have tormented my poor soul enough. Now I must speak, because soon it will be too late. I told you I am his wife. When we married, he was 50 years old. I was 20, an ignorant girl. We married in a city in Russia. University, never mind. The name is of no importance. God protect you, Anna, murmured the old professor. We were reformers, revolutionaries, nihilists. You understand. He, I, and many others. Then came the hard days. A police officer was killed. Many were arrested. Evidence was required. And my husband, to save himself and claim the reward, betrayed his comrades and his own wife. Yes, because of his confession, we were all taken. Some went to the gallows. Others were sent to Siberia. I was among those sent, though my sentence was not for life. My husband took his blood money and came to England to live quietly. But he knew this. If the Brotherhood ever learned where he was, justice would find him within a week. The old man reached for another cigarette, lit it, and said, I am in your hands, Anna. You have always been kind to me. I have not yet told them how low you fell, she said. There was one among our comrades, my true companion in spirit, noble, selfless, full of love, every virtue my husband lacked. He hated violence. If what we did was a crime, then we might all have been guilty, but he was different. He wrote to us again and again, trying to turn us back from our path. Those letters could have saved him. And I kept a diary. Day by day, I wrote my feelings for him and the beliefs of each of us. My husband found those letters in my diary, and he kept them. He did everything he could to have the young man executed, but he failed. Alexis escaped the gallows, only to be sent to Siberia. Since then, he has labored in the salt mines. Think of that, you traitor, that noble man, whose name your filthy lips are not worthy to speak, lives like a slave while I spare your wretched life. You were always a noble woman, Anna, said the old man, drawing deeply on a cigarette. She struggled to rise, but pain seized her. She gave a small cry and sank back down. I must finish, she whispered. When my sentence ended, I sought the letters in the diary, because if I could deliver them to the Russian government, Alexis would be freed. I knew my husband was in England. After months of searching, I found him. I knew he still possessed my diary, because while I was in Siberia, he wrote to me with bitter reproaches, quoting from it. But I knew his vindictive nature too well to believe he would give them up willingly. So the task fell to me. I hired a detective and managed to place him in my husband's house as a secretary. You had a second secretary, Sergius, the one who left in such a hurry. He discovered that the papers I wanted were kept in the desk compartment, and he made a copy of the key. But he refused to go any further. Still, he drew me a plan of the house and told me the study was always empty in the mornings because the secretary worked there only in the afternoon. At last I gathered my courage and came here myself. I took what I needed, but it cost me dearly. I had just taken the papers and was locking the compartment when a young man caught me. Earlier that morning I had seen him on the road and asked the way to Professor Corum's house, never knowing he worked here. Of course, cried Holmes. When the secretary returned, he mentioned to the professor that he had met a woman on the road, and as he died, he tried to send a message to the professor. He meant the woman I told you about. You must let me speak, the woman said imperiously. Her face was contorted with pain. When he fell, I ran from the study, but I chose the wrong door and found myself in my husband's room. He threatened to betray me, but I told him that if he did, His life was in my hands, for I could deliver him to the Brotherhood. I live now not for myself, but for my purpose. My husband knew I would do as I said. From that moment, our fates were bound together. That was the only reason he protected me. He hid me in this dark place, known only to him from the old days. He shared his food with me. When the police withdrew, we agreed I would leave silently in the night and never return. But somehow you uncovered our plan. She drew a small packet from within her clothing. "These are my last words," she said. "Here is the packet that will save Alexis. I place it in your honor and in your devotion to justice. Take it. Carry it to the Russian embassy. I have done my duty and—" "Stop her!" Holmes shouted. He sprang across the room and seized the small vial in her hand with sudden violence. "Too late," she said, sinking back onto the bed. "Too late. I drank the poison before I left my hiding place. My head is spinning. I'm going. The packet is yours, sir." It was a simple case, said Holmes as we returned toward the city, though in some respects a highly instructive one. The key to it lay from the beginning in the golden spectacles. If the victim had not snatched them from the woman's face, I doubt we could have solved the mystery at all. From the thickness of the lenses, I knew her eyesight was terribly defective, and that without them, she was helpless. When you told me she had walked along that narrow strip of grass without making a single misstep, I remarked that it was a great achievement. What I truly meant was that it was impossible unless she carried a spare pair. And since she did not, I was forced to follow the hypothesis that she never left the house. When I observed that the two corridors were nearly identical, I realized she might have taken the wrong one. In that case, she must have entered the professor's room. To test this, I searched the room carefully, looking for any place suitable for concealment. The carpet was in one piece and fixed to the floor, so I ruled out a trapdoor beneath it. But behind books, yes. As you know, Watson, old libraries often conceal such things. Though books lay scattered throughout the room, one section of shelving stood oddly clear. It caught my eye. It might well have been a door. There was no obvious mark to guide me, but the carpet was gray and perfect for observation. That is why I smoked those excellent cigarettes so freely and scattered the ash before the bookcase I suspected. A simple trick, but remarkably effective. Then I went downstairs, and while you spoke with Mrs. Marker, though you did not know what I sought, I learned that the professor's appetite had suddenly increased. I understood at once that he was feeding a second person. On our second visit to the room, I dropped the cigarette box deliberately, giving myself the perfect excuse to kneel and observe the floor at close range. From the marks upon the ash, it was clear that someone had emerged from the hiding place during our absence. And now, Hopkins, here we are at Charing Cross. I congratulate you on bringing the matter to a successful conclusion. I presume you are returning to headquarters. We, Watson, had better go to the Russian embassy.